Hello and welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I'm Cherie Burton. Excited to be with you today, sharing, I guess you could say, a really controversial topic to some people, maybe to the whole collective of humanity. I don't know. It's just, you use the right epistemology and you confuse people with words and all of a sudden it changes the meaning of things. And so when you talk about sexuality, especially women's sexuality, sometimes it's got some big emotional charge. I'm hoping we destigmatize that today. Melisa Keenan is with me. She is an intimacy coach, and she has worked with a myriad of women and couples in helping to reclaim their sense of worth through self-intimacy. She's a mom of 4. She lives on a hobby farm outside of Reno, Nevada. She and I have known each other for a number of years, and it's just been exciting to see her create what she has in the realm of unraveling intimacy. Some of you may be a little shocked at how deep we go with this topic and some of the verbiage we use. We even talk about J-Lo and Shakira and that halftime show Super Bowl thing. We had some thoughts around that, and it's just, I like to talk about controversial stuff. So we definitely go there. I hope you learned something today. I sure did. I hope you share this podcast with your girlfriends, your sister friends, because coming up this spring, we're going to do a whole series on getting super, super real with emotional health and healing. So stay tuned for that and join us in our Women Seeking Wholeness Facebook group. Now on to Melisa talking about sexuality and intimacy. Okay, Melisa, this is so cool that we are reconnecting this way because you and I have known each other for over 10 years, here and there, on and off. We first connected through my cousins out in Nevada who had a class that I was teaching, and you were there, and we've just kind of lost track with each other. And then I find out you're doing this cool stuff with intimacy for women. And I hopped onto your Facebook group. I'm like, is this the Melisa I met 10 years ago? I don't know. You just blossomed into this purpose. So I'm super curious. Let's just start with that. How, because you're a mom of young kids, and you're sort of in more of a conservative culture, community, and religion. And so I think it's super bold, and I wouldn't say ballsy, but that's like the male slang term. You're very ovary-ish around stepping into this empowerment with intimacy. So I'm curious, how did that evolve for you? How did you get to where you're at with teaching this stuff?
You bringing up our first meeting and talking it like that immediately zapped me back. I can remember sitting in the house that we were in when you gave a doTERRA presentation, and you got so real right away. And you bringing that up just brought tears to my eyes, because you're so right. When I met you, I was, a brand new mom, and I was terrified of life. I was so scared. Oh my gosh. That's where my journey began. When we crossed paths, my marriage was dangling from a thread. My husband and I had just graduated college, and my husband was super lost about, he had no direction, and it was the worst timing because, when you graduate college, everyone's favorite question is, so what are you going to do? What's your next big step? And he was like, I don't know. And I was about to have our second child. And I was like, we got to figure this out. We had agreed together that I would be a stay-at-home mom. And here I have one little toddler and a baby on the way. And he has no idea what he wants to do. So the only reason that we even crossed paths, the reason I knew your cousins, was because we moved out to this place in the middle of the desert. I found a place where we could work in exchange for rent because we had no income. That's where I was. And I was so riddled with anxiety, and then also so much trauma from my childhood that I hadn't realized was still affecting me so severely. So anyway, that's where I come from. It brings me back to that humble beginning. And because of my husband, his journey, it really forced me to look at myself, because I had to keep asking, okay, like I want this marriage. I want this life that we've started. We barely have started, we have just a little tiny foundation and 2 kids. Then how can I change things for us? Because he was in a totally stuck place. Not in a place where he was really willing or ready to do any sort of growth. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I kept going back to me. And that's when I started finding healing for myself, and eventually found empowerment enough that we separated for 6 months, a few years later. And I told him, look, you've got to figure this out, because we cannot continue this way. I don't deserve this. So he did. He began his own recovery journey from a sex addiction and became, really strong that way. And then we started finally being able to work on our marriage. And because both of us had done that intense healing work from within, we were able to come together and actually form the marriage that we thought we were going to get, like the day we said yes to each other, the day we said I do. So that's where I come from. I have such a passion about it. Yeah, I honestly thought this is a hopeless cause. And I literally would curse myself every day. I would think, I repeated the exact patterns of my family, the very patterns that I was so determined not to repeat. Here I am, with a husband who's got a sex addiction, maybe running around on me, and, has no direction in his life. We're broke as heck. And here I am, I've repeated these patterns, and it's hopeless. I used to just say, this is hopeless. This is never going to, I've ruined my life. That's what I would say. And now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for that hell.
Well, I have to tell you that for many women, it's the throes of early motherhood, like having the first, being a mother, that awakens all these dormant ancestral and generational patterns around beliefs about sexuality. Because when you're courting and you're in the kind of like the honeymoon romance phase, and then you get married and you're like, oh my gosh, we're married. It's the reality of raising a child that completely changes. Number one, it changes the trajectory of intimacy between you and your spouse, because there's another person you have to be intimate with, like attached to your boob or your hip or something. And also you have to look at how do I want to show up as a mother? And that early programming that you got, that was modeled to you, is so ingrained that it will spill out. And you could find yourself at a crossroads or you could say a healing crisis of how do I, even though all of us probably had great things we loved about our mothers, there's other things that we didn't want to perpetuate. So it's interesting that you say that you followed that, subconscious patterning and got yourself right into where you didn't want to be, because you recreated what was modeled to you unknowingly.
And the way I describe it is that I had learned to guard my heart so strong. And the main, strategy that I used to do that was through perfectionism. I was going to be perfect and do it all and be it all. And, no one would ever see any of my weaknesses. And that was my strategy, to just guard my heart. And then you have a child and it's like, oh crap, my heart is on the outside. And the vulnerability of having my child, and, any of the possibilities that whatever could happen to her, and then looking at her and feeling so much pressure to not do what my parents did, it was so intense for me, because I was at this cognitive dissonance constantly. I want to keep all my walls up, but I want to deeply and tenderly connect with this human being that I created, and my husband, who we created this human being together. And no, but I have to keep my walls up. It back and forth constantly. It's so excruciating.
So I think a good place for us to start is the word intimacy, because I think it is a word that is so charged for people, and it can bring up and elicit so many different meanings and emotions and paradigms. I know you and I kind of teach the same thing. When you break down the word intimacy, it's into me see, or into me I see. So it's about self. It's always about self. But how would you, in your vernacular, sort of define what intimacy is?
I mean, if we were going to talk about it in terms of, asking what is it really, I would say at the core, it's living with an open heart. It's the opposite of what I just described. It's being willing to put down all your walls, because the love and connection that you will experience when you do that is more important and greater than the vulnerability and fear that may come along with that. So it's putting ourselves out there. It's being willing to risk being hurt or being rejected in the name of love and connection.
I love that definition, because really, if you're risk aversive, it's not living. If you want to just live your life minimizing risk, that's not feeling alive. So I love that definition of intimacy, because you talked about willing to risk for love and connection. And I love that. Because really, we cannot control or manipulate or manage a relationship with someone else. All we can do is forge our own, our own inner connection and that open-heartedness that you talked about, so that we stay pliable. We don't harden. I have seen bitterness. I have seen anger. I have seen so many things arise from, we did it. I did an episode with someone who we talked just about the lessons of betrayal. And after this podcast airs, there's going to be a forthcoming podcast on betrayal trauma recovery. And this is more about healing the connection to yourself, so that irrespective of what is happening with your partner or your most intimate connections with others, you have intimacy with yourself. And this is something that people misconstrue and twist and spin and just don't understand. So when you're talking about open-hearted living, what have you found? First of all, we need to come back to your story. We'll come back to open-hearted living, but after your husband had this sex addiction, you guys got separated, and then you came back, obviously, and reconciled. I'm assuming with new boundaries and a renewed sense of doing what wasn't done in your home of origin. And then, how did that work into your professional work and what you're doing as a thought leader with intimacy?
Yeah, it came to a point where I felt so much peace and joy in my life. Both my husband and I, it's like we felt like we had been given some secret key. And it caused me pain for about a year. I felt this way, like this pain that I have this secret and I see so many women suffering, and I could help them. I think I could help them. And I just continued to surrender to God over and over about this, and ultimately was led first to a book that I really, really love called Fascinating Womanhood by Helen Andelin. It's so funny, this book.
Oh my gosh, I hate that book. No, I hate it.
I was just going to say, I was
Mom had that book.
If the listeners stuff, they may be like, what is this? And the first time I read it, actually, I got through the first 2 chapters and I threw it across the room. I was like, what is this BS? Somebody had recommended it to me, and I was like, what? But so funny, about a year after that, I was praying and asking God, what do I need for my own personal healing? And actually, I was asking, how can I draw closer to you, to God? And the answer came, go get Fascinating Womanhood. And I was like, I just donated it. Like, seriously, a couple weeks before that. So I went and I was like, I hated that book, but I read it asking God to show me like who I am through this book. And I just said, whatever pieces there are that are supposed to be for me, let me receive them. And whatever are not for me, then I'll just pass those along and somebody else can take those principles. And that's how I read it. And it just opened up for me the fact that I'm a feminine being. And I finally started to really heal the truth that I'm a woman, and that's a beautiful thing, and that I can be soft. I can let my walls down. And it wasn't until I really did that I was able to actually begin to heal my marriage and experience intimacy with my spouse. So it started there. I read the book. I wanted to know more. I became a teacher in Fascinating Womanhood, but I found out that they really want you to stick to the principles and nothing else. So I quickly shifted gears because I was like, that's not, the thing is it teaches this beautiful ideal of a woman who's
I think there was one thing in there that was triggering me. I read it when I was like a teenager, and I'm really afraid of mice. And there was actually a suggestion, because it's all about the man kind of feeling like chivalrous and like helping you. And I know that's noble. Like I get the like spiritual template of that. I get the idea, but it was like put a mouse in your pocket and then like throw the mouse and go and like jump into his arms or jump over. Like I would do that anyway. I wouldn't have to fake it. But I'm like, that is bogus. I guess that was the only thing I had about that. It's like,
that's hilarious.
I would have to that was my only contest, or like, I guess resistance to what the book was teaching is there was a couple things of like, just pretend that you're this feminine, like being on this railroad tracks all tied up and the man has to come in and save you for you to be powerful. And I thought that wouldn't last very long in a honeymoon phase. I mean, after the honeymoon phase, that inauthenticity would wear off. But I do agree there's some principles there that we have lost. We have lost the feminine arts, the true feminine arts of
which may or may not have anything to do with housekeeping or being a good cook or any of these. That's all like social stereotype stuff.
Yeah.
But it's that softness or the nurturing that is inherently ours, or even our ability to connect. Like that is our gift. Men are not driven to connect. Like if we look evolutionarily, they're driven to reproduce and like protect. That's what they're like, if we're just looking at them as an animal, that's what they're built for. We're the ones who are built to nurture. Our bodies inherently are there to feed our children, and we are the ones who receive our husbands. And so like all these things, we have lost it. And I had completely lost it. In the name of being so strong and tough and surviving, I took all my strength and I just wanted to be a man. Honestly, I wouldn't have consciously known that. But I remember my uncle growing up. I lived with my aunt and uncle from 12 to 18. And my uncle, if I did something he liked, he'd walk up and he would slap me as hard as he could on the back and say, "Good man." That was my praise. That was my reward for being a good girl, So I was really I really had a deep ingrained belief that to be a woman was dangerous. To be soft and be receiving and be open, and all that was dangerous.
It was dangerous because you didn't have safety around that healthy male protection. Yeah. And I think even as women, we don't sometimes feel safe around other women for more, I guess, complex reasons. It's like women are so good at sizing other women up. It's just a thing we naturally do. And that's where comparison can come in, because we want to be we have this deep feminine need for beauty and connection and intimacy. And when a woman is in a healthy partnership with herself, with her soul, it's a non-issue. But as she's developing her own, I guess, if she's self-actualizing and coming into her own skin and being in her body, it becomes less about feeling safe around other women, because you realize I can appreciate her beauty, and because I know who I am, and I can appreciate my beauty, and we're very different.
Exactly.
I have to ask you something. And now I'm skipping around a little bit, but this just came to my mind. So did you watch the Super Bowl halftime show?
Yes. The hottest topic on social media.
I know.
Right now.
I'm so sick of it. I haven't weighed in, because here's what I saw, because I teach feminine archetypes. And so I in my Stand Speak Shine school, I actually have the women in my students create a board of feminine archetypes that they counsel with, just, through their mind's eye or through meditation or whatever. The women from history that they respect, and sometimes they bring a man in or something. But what I saw was wild woman archetype when I saw that halftime show. And I think that it's not as dangerous and evil and bad and horrible as some people are making it out to be. I saw a lot of women shaming Shakira and J-Lo. I said it a lot. I'm like literally shaming them. And I have, I can see both sides. I really can, because my 18-year-old son and my husband and I were watching it at the same time. And my 5-year-old daughter and 7-year-old son were popping in and out. But I thought, if I react to this in a if I say, I can't believe she did that, or what's up with that, in a derogatory way, to my husband and son, I'm putting more shame around the experience for them if they have feelings about that. But I just saw the wild woman archetype. And then I got on Instagram and saw my friend Amber, who's my fellow Mary Magdalene compatriot. We teach a lot of the Magdalene stuff. She said the same thing. She said the exact same thing. She said, I see the wild woman archetype. So what did you feel about it?
I'm so glad you asked. A big part of my journey has been stepping into neutrality. Like I mentioned at the beginning, perfectionism is all about putting everything in a box. And so when I see women on Instagram and Facebook saying, shaming and saying all these strong statements about how wrong that is, I see perfectionism. And under that, I see fear. Tons of fear. And what I did actually in my Facebook group, I have a Facebook group called Unraveling Intimacy. What I did was I said, then how does this whole, halftime show affect you personally? How does it affect your intimacy story? Because what I know is that these women who look at this and say, wrong, bad, so offended, even triggered inside, they're having a physical reaction to this thing. What I know about them is that they deeply struggle with intimacy. It's like a direct correlation. I mean, does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Did I explain that well?
It's our reactions about things are never about what's going on the exterior. It's always about our own experience. So I love that you brought neutrality in, because that's the practice I move into as well, is like stepping back from it and taking the charge out and looking at it like those are two feminine, empowered feminine beings. They are souls. They are mothers. And it's what they're choosing to do. Now, yes, it is a family show, and there does need to be some conversation around it, but it's a conversation opener to climb in and say, how does this affect you? How does this affect me? It's really interesting that I can stay in neutrality and observe how this is affecting me. Like, I didn't love the crotch grabbing.
Exactly.
And so I'm like, okay, yep. but those are, all of those things are culturally ascribed. And because we come from this Puritan culture, I mean, I am all about moral values and, all of those things that keep families intact and whatnot. However, there can be these puritanistic, highbrow, judgmental, shaming, holier than thou stances that we take that really are creating division in our society. So I thought it was beautiful. Yeah. I was uncomfortable in some places, but I got to look at why that was that way for me. And I actually asked my 18-year-old son, well, what did you think? Because J-Lo is my age. And he's like, well,
right.
He's like, I can't see you doing that, Mom. But he's like, if that's her talent and that's what she does, he's like, I was really like half watching it, honestly. He's like, it didn't, So, but if I had been like, oh my gosh, close your eyes, Sawyer, like, this is, if I'd done all that, and even with my husband, like, that's just creating. And I literally have read posts from women who are like, I'm choosing not to watch it because of, the spirit is not going to be there and whatever. And like, as a family, we don't ever watch the Super Bowl because it's biggest sex trafficking ring. And so that's their story. Right. And they're trying to make it that way for everyone. They're trying to put their story on everybody else because they're taking a higher road that makes them
well. And I do appreciate like people sharing from their hearts that way, because that's their beginning of stepping into intimacy. Like, here's what I think, here's what I feel. And then people can challenge them or people can agree with them. And then they can go back in again and go, what do I really feel? Like, who am I? Ultimately, like you said, nothing is really about what's on the external. It's all a mirror about what's on the internal. So like, just as much as I didn't feel judgment with Shakira and J-Lo, I don't feel judgment for these, women who are, I have one of my best friends said she threw a blanket over the TV and that's what they had decided to do. When J-Lo came out, they thought maybe this will be different. They took it down and then they put it back up again. We actually did leave halfway through because, for my kids, I wanted to talk to them, and we did have an open conversation that was like, what did you think? And how did you feel? And I actually asked the question, did anyone kind of have those like tingly feelings inside? Like, did anyone really like it? And my kids are all so young. They're all like, no, Mom, it was just weird. Like, that's what my kids said because they're so little. But I said, I liked it. It kind of turned me on. And I want you guys to know that if it did, that's a normal reaction. And actually, that's part of why they built the show that way. They wanted to arouse some of those feelings, and that would be a normal reaction. And also, let's just give them their privacy. That's how we discuss it with our kids. Let's give them some privacy.
I love that. So when I was jumping around again a little bit, let's come back to intimacy. You have so eloquently expressed to me in your writing that you said we cannot deeply see into and hold space with another without being able to deeply see into and hold space for ourselves. So even in watching the Super Bowl, and you said that elicited a natural, I guess you could say, sexually chemical, biophysical, physiological response in me, because that's just how bodies work. Mm-hmm. And that's about going within and realizing that, right? Because whatever we're seeing with our eyes and whatever we're intuiting is, if we want that to remain healthy, it needs to be about holding space for ourselves, being a container for our own reactions and looking inside and holding that. So I loved how you phrased that. So how do you do that? How have you seen are the best ways to foster that self-intimacy with open-heartedness?
Well, the first step is to decide I'm going to live my life with an open heart, and then checking in from time to time. Is my heart open right now, or is it closed? And I have to tell you, the first time I heard that concept, this comes from the book The Untethered Soul by Michael.
I have that.
His last name
Starts with an S. I think.
Such a good book.
Yeah, I have that. Yeah.
Does it Michael something? Michael Singer, is that what it is?
Maybe.
I don't know. Anyway. Well, anyway, so live your life with an open heart. The first time I heard that concept, I was like, that is a bunch of woo-woo. Like, what are they talking about? Oh my gosh, I've come a long way. So, but
I was going to say,
honestly,
you have come a long ways, because that one book you recommended, I can't remember the name of it. I went and ordered it and I was like, this is naughty, but not in a, like, it was so explicit, but we'll get back to that book later. Do you know what book I'm talking about? It's not tantric sex, but it's, what was that?
It's sexual practices of Kudo Shuka.
Yes, that one.
Did I recommend that to you?
Yes. Well,
I love that book.
Facebook group. Yeah. And you're like, I would have never, ever, recommend this book until recently. And I'm like, I haven't heard of that either. And I ordered it, and Jeff and I were looking through it, and we're like, woo, this is really interesting. This is very specific. And then we had to look at why, because it's illustrated, right? There's drawings, and it's like, how is this triggering our intimacy story to look at this? Anyway, sorry, go ahead. So the Untethered Soul is all about open-hearted living.
Yeah. So literally you can just walk around and ask yourself, like, is my heart open right now? Is it closed? Like, what does that feel like for me? Just starting to get curious about what that looks like, what that feels like. And then I would say step number 2 is acceptance of wherever you are at any moment of any given time. And that both of these practices, I just did these things on my own. When I work with clients, like, it's an accelerated pace because they have a coach alongside them. But each of these practices, I want to say, took me about a year of like, is my heart open? Is it not? The next one was, what do I feel? And what can I learn from this? Because I would feel feelings and then I would hate myself for them, like, constantly. I don't know if you've ever heard yourself saying this to yourself, like, I don't know why I feel so mad about this. I don't know why I'm so upset right now. Like, why can't I just get over it? All that kind of self-talk. That was my constant reality. So that would be step 2, is accepting whatever it is. And the question that, again, helps me to access acceptance is, what can I learn from this? What do I feel? What can I learn from this? And those are my first 2, I would say my first 2 steps to really understanding and beginning to embrace yourself.
So that is, I think the task of life is just cultivating and sourcing your own inner sanctum, your own inner reserves of love and power. And you talk a lot about softening. So when I did the yoga teacher training, I did it with my daughter, who's now 21. We did it 2 years ago. And so she had just graduated high school, and that age is tender for a young burgeoning woman. But it rocked our worlds, because although I had understood the concept of embodiment, I didn't really understand how pivotal it is to open and soften, because you have to do that in the yoga poses. If you want to get into these poses, there's literally this whole talk about opening and softening. And sometimes you visualize that area of the body that's really tight and holding tension. And sometimes there's trauma there. Sometimes there's something going on there in that area of the body that isn't allowing that flexibility and that softening. So the whole practice of yoga and / embodiment was about letting, like you were talking about, like letting the walls down, softening, opening, that pliability, that teachability really is huge for embodiment and intimacy.
Absolutely.
So
I love that parallel.
So tell me, as an intimacy coach, what you find when women are coming to you and they're feeling so much pain about not being able to connect to the person they love. And I actually attract a lot of women too, who don't even know what love is. They don't even know what healthy partnership or committed love looks like or should feel like, because there's so many things we see in the movies and even at church and our family systems. And we just lost touch with what that is. What are some prevailing themes that you've seen with women who've come into your practice?
The most common thing that I see off the bat, and where I kind of can judge like what maybe what layer they're at in this healing process, is the most outer layer is they're just like, I freaking hate my husband. We're so miserable, and they want to blame him. Everything is his fault. If he would,
Yeah.
then we could make this work. But ultimately I hate him, and I'm not even sure if there's hope. That's this outer sort of surface layer. And then as I get a little deeper, I sit with that and I hold space for that. And if they've reached their second level of, some women that's where they stay. And so usually if I'm on a call like that conversation ends pretty quickly, because if you're not willing to look at yourself at all, there's not going to be any healing, bottom line. Like, that's it.
And that's why narcissism, that's why people that are in relationships with narcissistic partners, it's so hard to heal that, because the narcissistic partner literally they lack the capacity to go inside it, or at least they haven't come to that place in their personal development where they can do that, because it's so unsafe to them, or whatever happened to them when they were younger. It has become such a huge wall that they've put up that they are in absolute denial of self-accountability. It's a tough one. I just want to throw that in there, because so there's a lot of women who are feeling super hopeless because their partner will not have some narcissistic tendencies and will not look at their stuff.
Right, exactly. So yeah, then the next, usually if I hold space for that and listen and empathize, and boy, I've been there, so I do really empathize with that space. Then usually if I ask a couple more questions to get to that next layer of their heart, then the next stage is they're crying and they're sharing with me, I really love him, and I really think he's a good person, and I think we can make this work, but I don't even know where to start. And what comes out is, I know what I don't like about this situation, because it keeps happening over and over and over, but I don't even really know what I want. And that's a huge telltale sign that I've seen for women in our generation, is because we've all endured things. We all have these warrior spirits, and we're strong, and we've self-preserved and protected. We really struggle to, sorry, my brain just completely left me.
Happens to me frequently.
Dang it, I hate when that happens. Oh, women they're self-preserving, they struggle with, what was I just saying, Cherie?
I didn't know, but if they're self-preserving, they might be struggling with, what came to me is hoarding, like energetic hoarding, but that comes with protection or putting on weight as a means to protect yourself from intimacy. Unknowingly, subconsciously. I see that a lot.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I think what I was going to say was that they struggle with showing their true emotions, and they also struggle with letting themselves believe that anything could be better than what they have. Because believing that anything could be better than what we have is vulnerable, and it takes some softening, and it takes some willingness to have hope and willingness to exercise a little faith. And there's a lot of unknown there, and we put ourselves again at a risk for rejection or disappointment. So very often I see that women are like, oh, I hate the way these things are, and they have no idea what they actually want. So that's usually where I start with women, is like, okay, let's break this down then. Like, what do you really want? And, the surface level answer might be, I just really want him to finish the bathroom remodel. It's like, no. Let's break it down a little further. What do you really want? because there's something underneath that. Like there's pieces missing there.
Yeah. Women, we're not trained to share what we want. We're trained to take care of everyone else's wants. And so a lot of the work I did early on as a life coach was literally spending massive energy in getting women to want what they want and be okay with that. Because that's not the programming we got to be okay to want. Because our needs should, typically we've been told our needs should come second. And that I've seen that in a lot of marriage dynamics. So if we're talking about this authenticity and vulnerability, kind of going within, really seeing yourself, what practices have you seen? Let's say that there's a woman who, I'm just going to use this avatar that I have in my mind's eye of this really loving mother who's like super, dedicated to her children and children of all ages. And she's really busy in her community. She serves people a lot. And she loves her husband. However, she may have let herself go a little bit. She feels super insecure in the bedroom. She doesn't like him to see her naked. She feels almost a little guilty about certain aspects of sexuality because she doesn't know if something's appropriate or not. So she just kind of shuts that down. She shuts down her sexual energy. She doesn't know what's spiritually apropos, if you will. So I actually see this quite a bit. So what?
Me too.
I'm sure. So what is your, in terms of self-intimacy and connecting and everything, how do you, in a sexual way, right? Because there's intimacy with yourself where you can hear your soul talk and you can, feel God and you can feel really grounded and really alive in your own being. And then sexuality is a whole other realm. Even though they're very connected, some women taking that leap from just being herself to being her sexual self is quite a leap. So for that woman that I just described, how would you help her?
Well, I'd love to just spit out like a formula, but ultimately what I do is I really work with her and her heart and right where she is. So I would flip around all those insecurities that you just listed as if she had just listed those to me. And I would say, okay, so on the other side of feeling so insecure in the bedroom, what would you rather be experiencing? Maybe she says, I just want to experience like connection and not worry. And I would say, okay, on the other side of, most of the time you're not even in the mood or you'd kind of just rather do without sex. Like, what would you rather be experiencing? And she might say like, I just want to feel more free. Like I want to feel like loved and supported by my husband. And I want to feel like there's even space for me to like play or be, open to connecting sexually. So based on what she says, then I would help her kind of decode like, okay, let's look a little deeper then. So out of the things I just said, she wants to experience connection. She doesn't want to worry. The opposite of that sounds to me like she wants to experience more carefree. She mentioned she wants to feel more free or she wants to feel more loved and supported. She also mentioned she wants to be able to play. I find that it's really powerful for women to connect with their inner child in this process. So I would start with her there. And rather than being like, okay, your challenge is buy a new lingerie and like, just when your husband shows up, you've already got a babysitter, like that would be like, let's just clean out the wound with some alcohol right now. Instead, I would say, Let's go based on what your heart desires said that you wanted. And how can you create connection? How can you create carefree? How can you create these things yourself? How can you experience being loved and supported? I mean, that's a huge one, because no matter how much her husband loves or supports her, we don't know. But no, say he's the most loving, supportive from the outside husband, she won't receive any of that if she's not giving that also to herself. So we just break it down. Okay, how do you create these things for yourself? And I would help her come up with strategies that felt really good to her. And then, week by week, it's like, okay, little tiny baby steps until she gets to the point where she can go to her husband and say, I really want to be more carefree in my sexuality. I want to embody my sexuality. I actually really want to connect with you, but I'm terrified. I feel unappreciated and I feel unsupported and I'm going through all these struggles. Like, how can we create, would you be willing to work with me where we can create a space so I can start to feel more safe to do these things or experience my sexuality as well? That'd be kind of, I'd say, if you took a magnifying glass and looked at some of my coaching sessions, that's what we would do.
Yeah, that's great. I think that first step is like, what do you want? And how do you see this in your best case scenario playing out in a partnership? How do you feel about self-exploration with women? I don't know how else to phrase it, but everyone has a different take on this. I know I follow some very Christian podcast sex therapists who actually encourage women to explore themselves sexually. I've heard everything all the way across the board, ranging from, no, that, that's not appropriate. I think other people dictating to us what is and is not appropriate for our bodies is a whole other deferring authority thing that I'm not comfortable with. But what is your take on that? How have you seen that show up even in your work?
As a coach, that's the thing is, as a coach, it doesn't really matter what I think. It doesn't matter, where my belief system lies with this. If they are like, I want to experience more carefree, and they decide a great strategy for them to experience that is, I'm going to get a vibrator and I'm going to explore and I'm going to do that. And that would allow me to experience carefree. Then I say, okay, great. Let's hear how it goes. I want you to report back and let me know. Did you experience being carefree? How did that help you? Whatever. If they have the belief that they don't, that they're, uncomfortable with that or whatever, then I help them come up with strategies on the flip side of that. But if you're asking personally, I've seen that it can go a lot of different directions. I think that some self-exploration is really powerful. I also have seen that it can become its own form of addiction and wall, because you get your own, you create all of that from within, and then there's no ability to bring someone else in. So I've seen it go that direction as well. And then I've also, seen where it can be really powerful to do masturbation while with spouse, or there are so many different I want to say interworkings or different ways that
just creative, just being creative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when we're really stuck in what we don't want, we see no possibilities. We don't see that there's any possibilities. Everything feels hopeless. But when we start to step into what do I want and what do I really value? What do I want to experience? The possibilities start to really open and blossom. And so, to say it's a necessity, to embody your sexuality, or no, it's not. I can't even say, I think everybody is different. Every our connections that we have with ourselves, our stories, all of that plays in.
Yeah.
So I just think it's one strategy.
Yeah. I was just curious. I agree with everything you said. I think it can go either direction, and a lot of it has to be with how the person is willing to be vulnerable with a partner as opposed to just themselves. Right. And also like, I think it's really powerful to teach, I guess it is just really about a way of being when we're talking about intimacy, into me, I see, uh, I have so many thoughts around this, but let's just talk about religion for a minute and how some of these things can get really damaging, because I know they really hammer the youth about masturbation in a lot of religions, which I have seen create so much shame with my friends' children and my own children. And so I've had to do a lot of unpacking of what has been given to them in the form of body shaming around that. And that's something little children do, for crying out loud, right? But when you get to be a teenager and anyway, there's a lot of shame that gets perpetuated there. What has that come up? I know your children are younger, so maybe that's not an issue yet, but especially young men. I mean, it's mostly young men that are.
If I could speak to women, actually, I'd love to speak to this, because I think that we strive, as little girls, it's our main goal in life is to be a good girl. That's our main goal in life. So when we hear so many teachings about how our body is lustful and carnal and et cetera, and I've done my own spiritual seeking to have an understanding of what that actually means. I believe my body is inherently good, but I had to come to that understanding. That wasn't something that was taught to me. But what I do see is that this then teaches a woman that basically her whole pelvic area of her body is bad. And what I will say is this goes back to that book you brought up, The Sexual Practices of Kyoto Shuka. It's some kind of Native American tribe. I don't really know, but it is so beautiful. And I had to go through this process myself of recognizing that, guess what? Females have like 7 different kinds of vaginal anatomy. The way that your clitoris sits, the way that your labia sit, the way that your cervix, how low or how high your cervix sits, where your G-spot is located, how easy it is to access your clitoris. Like, there are all these variations. And then, that's kind of on a deeper level. On a more surface level, just the way that our vaginas look is different. And because I had been exposed to pornography as a kid, I always thought as an adult, my vagina was hideous. Like, why doesn't mine look like the ones on pornography? Well, it turns out the ones on pornography are one specific type. They generally tend to be that kind. And so it's the one that looks the most childlike. So
I just saw this whole, I follow Gwyneth Paltrow on Goop, and there's a whole Netflix docuseries that she's just put out. And there's one on just what you're talking about, how most women feel like their feminine anatomy is like hideous, or like that there's some like freak or anomaly, because all the images, first of all, you don't see anything on you'd have to look at pornography to see a woman's anatomy. Right. And they even mentioned that these women that are in pornography, oftentimes they will get labiaplasty or some kind of those surgeries have gone up 45% for women. So that they look younger. Wow. And they also bleach the color so that it's lighter, so it's pinker, so they look younger, like you're talking about, which I found so fascinating. And they and it was very appropriate, but they showed probably about 10 different women's vaginas, and they were all completely like normal, different, totally diverse. So it's interesting you bring that up, because no one, I mean, at least a penis is like out there, right? And there's a general consensus of what it looks like. But as a woman,
but I will say there is all kinds of shame for men too, if you're smaller versus if you're bigger. And of course, so they've got their own, but
they got their own. Yeah. I understand. I totally agree. Yeah. Yeah. But when we're talking about religions perpetuating like the body is evil, it's an enemy to God, it's shameful, it's your vehicle for temptation. It just creates, especially the focus on modesty for young women. is in and of itself an underlying message that there's something wrong with her body and she's got to cover it up. Or she's responsible for the demise of the man sitting next to her.
See, and I disagree with that, but I have heard that being taught that way. I mean, I do cover my body, and I do follow those rules of modesty. But yes, if we, it really depends on how we're taught it, and there can be so many damaging messages in that way. So yeah, if we're taught all these things, and then we don't even know what our anatomy is. So say, for instance, this is just one simple example. Your cervix sits really low. So you have a vaginal canal that's like 2 inches, and your husband happens to be Mr. like large, and the first time, the second time, the 15th time you have sex, you're like, I hate sex. It hurts. This is horrible. I don't know why people like this. And in here you're thinking, something's wrong with me. Well, no, it turns out you just have a certain kind of anatomy. And it turns out if you knew more about how the body works, you would learn that the more aroused you get, then your cervix will draw back. And there are certain positions even where your cervix will draw back, so then it can be more enjoyable. So it just takes, I actually just worked with a sex coach. We just did a training together, collaborated together, and she knows a lot more about the anatomy and stuff like that, and different sex erotic types that we all have and stuff. But for me, what it comes down to is if I can communicate enough with my partner about what's working for me, what's not working for me, we get educated. I'm free to explore and understand my own body. He's free to explore and understand his own body. I'm free to explore and understand my desires, even if I want to fantasize, even if I want, to bring in something out of the ordinary, or, whatever, I want to try a subdom dynamic, or I want to, whatever, that I'm free to explore that. And he's also free to explore that. Then the possibilities are endless, not just in the bedroom, but in our marriage. Like, we can finally be the power couple that we all get married thinking, yeah, we're going to be this awesome couple, It's still possible. It's there. So
yeah. I have to say, I saw the little video clip of you and your husband dancing and singing, and it was so sweet. You guys were just so authentic and real, and just hugging and singing at the top of your lungs off key. And it was just so tender to see that interaction. It was just really touching to me. But yes, I think the word that we're as I'm putting all this together, as we kind of wrap up the discussion, I think it's really just about freedom. I think that's what the feminine energy wants. I think that's what the male energy wants. And when you're really trying to forge true intimacy, when you feel like you have a degree of intimacy with yourself in all domains, even and especially your sexual domain, you have that. You've sourced that sovereign energy in yourself. Then when you are in a partner dynamic, you can actually feed the other, and they can feed you. And then it just becomes more of that shared freedom. I don't even know the word for it, but it seems healthier to say, hey, there's nothing evil about this. This is bringing us closer. This, because there are so many women that I see, women of faith, doesn't matter what denomination, doesn't matter what spiritual path, who are running a program that there are certain things that they shouldn't be doing. And they don't feel free to have their own sovereignty. They feel like that in some way they must defer that to either their partner or someone else to give them that permission. So I just see that so much. It's quite stifling to their feminine energy, actually, because as women, we are natural, and J-Lo and Shakira, they trigger women because they're free. They're free.
Wow. That's a beautiful insight. I hadn't seen that yet. You're right.
So, okay. Well, is there anything else? I mean, I'm going to give your offerings in the show notes here to where people can connect to you, and how, and again, I think that when we're talking about the whole intimacy thing, it's a real rare soul who can come in and hold form for people who are journeying there. So I think you're a brave warrior for stepping into this work.
Thank you.
But are there any parting thoughts that you would offer as we're kind of wrapping our discussion up, of just maybe anything that you would add that we haven't handled or talked about?
I think just to reiterate the point that, or the truth that I would invite all listeners to contemplate for yourself. Don't take our word for it or my word for it, but contemplate for yourself. Like, intimacy truly is, as a woman, our natural state of being. It's who we really are. It's connected to our divinity. Intimacy literally is who we are. And so I would just invite the listeners to check in with that and go, am I experiencing that? Or is there pieces that are missing for me where I don't really know myself? I'm not really able to connect. I'm not really happy in my relationships. And what is that about? If I've always thought that my relationships suck, and it's across the board, I'm alone all the time, or I'm unsupported or whatever, to really bring that in and go, what am I doing to cultivate my divine intimacy?
Yeah, thank you for bringing the divine into the discussion, because our bodies are holy vessels, holy receiving vessels of giving and receiving love. And when we can come from that frame of thinking and that paradigm, then it feels like everything else will kind of absolve. I mean, I just think for me, it's just releasing the shame over and over that our foremothers have carried. And I think in the 70s, the women started to break out of it a little bit and kind of step into more of the owning their bodies. And that's where the feminist movement really hit. But I think now we're coming into, and I actually am a very soft feminist. I ascribe to a lot of feminist teachings, but I love the sacred masculine. And so I love just bringing people into a knowing of how both energies operate and how we can support each other, fostering the feminine energy in men, fostering the masculine energy in women. And with women, that masculine energy is giving. It's a way of giving. And it's also of like, this is what I want. This is my boundary, and this is what I desire. So giving women that freedom to want what they want is what I have seen to be the most powerful in terms of fostering that intimacy. So looks like you and I are on the same page with that.
Beautiful.
Well,
yeah, love that so much.
Thank you, Melisa. And I will direct our listeners to where they can find you. And I think that this is just, again, I honor you for what you do. And this is such a needed work in the world.
Thank you so much, Cherie, for this opportunity. I really enjoyed talking with you.
I find self-intimacy riveting and captivating. And I don't know, just that aspect of our soul that we are just into me I see, going within and open-hearted living that Melisa talked about. If you do get a chance to read the book, The Untethered Soul, that we referenced, it's an amazing book. It's one that's been sitting on my shelf for a while, that's been calling to me. And so the fact that she mentioned it, I'm like, I got to pick that up again. I didn't mention this at the beginning of the podcast, but this week in February marks the 1-year anniversary of the launch of the Women Seeking Wholeness podcast. So I'm going to be doing a couple of fun things and giveaways and other things. So stay tuned to Women Seeking Wholeness Facebook group, and we'll keep exploring these tough topics, because let's face it, we ladies got to stick together.